it literally changes right up until the last day of construction.
Of course.
Is because you don't know when you get into the field what you're going to find. Everything looks great on paper, but until you get in the ground, you quite literally don't know what you're unearthing.
Was it the first time we met? We were having the cigar outside, and you're like, yeah, like a project can go like $1 million, $2 million, just like this. You just never expect it when you put it like when you put a shovel in the ground. It's like,
that's right.
Really, like just gone. Like you were telling me about one development site you had to do, and they're like, it cost you $2 million to rectify the soil. I think it was.
That's right.
Welcome to another episode of DC Talks with David Cinelli. I'm your host, obviously, David Cinelli. This is episode 65, and today we have a really special treat for you. Got my good buddy, Nick Stilo. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Nick is from One Urban. Yeah, it's a great developer. Like you and your brother-in-law, I guess, did you guys start the company yourselves?
We did with 2 other partners.
Yeah. And how long has that been around for?
Since 2016.
Wow. So it's fairly new.
Yeah.
Fairly
yeah.
new.
Well, we're a couple years shy of 10 years.
Yeah. So Nick and I met, we actually met about 6-7 months ago, something like that.
Roughly. Yeah, it was last summer.
Yeah. So we went to, I always like to give a little introduction how I get to know my guests. So they're not just, somebody I just pulled off the street. So Nick and I were we're at a cigar night. I was Rocky Patel. As you guys know, I love my cigars. And Owen and I did a nice episode in the backyard about 9/11 with the cigars, which we should probably do one if you want to do. We should do another conspiracy theory in the backyard when it warms up a little bit. All right. Very good. And then, so Nick was with another friend of ours. You were inside a restaurant. We were going to meet you and you recognized me from outside.
Yeah, it was the funniest thing. I see you coming up the street. The restaurant is actually a few steps down from street level. Yeah. And I see you walking by and you're coming in, and the friend that invited
our mutual
me
friend
says, "Oh, here's David Cinelli." And I look and my jaw dropped. I said, "Hey, it's David Cinelli from Hot Listing or Hot Market."
Hot Market. Yeah.
And it's funny because we saw that show, my wife and I, we watched that show episode by episode on HGTV back in, it was maybe 2019, I think.
2020.
Oh, it was 2020, just before the pandemic.
We went live February 3rd, 2020, and the world shut down.
That's right. I remember it being just before the pandemic. And I saw you, my jaw dropped. I said, as soon as you walked in, I called you out. I said, "Hey, you're David Cinelli from that show." And the reaction you made was even funnier because you said, "Really, you recognize me?" Because you didn't think that a lot of people watched that show, but people did. I watched it. I enjoyed it with my wife.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I was saying, so our mutual friend that brought me in to the cigar night, he's sitting beside me. He's like, "What are you guys talking about?" He had no idea.
He had no idea.
Again, a friend of mine I've known for about a year, like at that point, over a year, but he had no idea I was on HGTV. It was just funny because I'm like, so I said to Nick, I'm like, "You're like the third or fourth person in the last, few years you ever recognized me." So I thought it was pretty funny. And I was like, and it turns out like you're a developer and you and your wife liked the show. And it was like, so immediate like that. Then we sat down beside each other, broke some bread together, and found we're fellow Christians as well. We have a lot of the same beliefs. So
yes, we are.
Yeah. So I love that. So that kind of solidified our friendship. So yeah, and then now we try to talk and we're on Instagram with each other all the time.
We've met a few times in between. So it's good to be on your show. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, thanks. And we will promote. You actually just started your own podcast as well. What's the name of it?
Yes, we did. It's Groundbreakers podcast, and Groundbreakers obviously because we break ground and we're groundbreaking in what we do in our developments.
Yeah, I love it. So we got to tune into that too. So we want to get a little bit to know a little bit about Nick, right? So, and the business and people's perception is a big one when it comes to development, especially in today's market where, interest rates are all over the place and people are foreclosing and they're coming after you a little bit, aren't they? Well, not you in general. I'm just saying developers. So before we even start that, how did you start in the development game? What did you do beforehand and how did you start into this?
So, I mean, that's a long story, but to make
we got time.
Okay. I don't know how much time I want to take of your shows and your guests, but I started investing in real estate really, really early. Was 20 when I bought my first property. I still own that property. And it was my dad who convinced me to buy a property. And the reason why he convinced me is because I didn't go to post-secondary. And he said, "Well, if you're not going to go to school, you're not going to get any education, and you're going to learn what I learned the hard way, and you're going to start investing your money." And I had put down $15,000 on a home. My God, if I can only go back and buy a few more of those.
Trust me, I know.
Put $15,000 in cash down on a home, a brand new pre-construction that I bought from Mason Homes out in Barrie. And that started my real estate journey. And that always, that asset for me and assets subsequent to that were always banks. And so I always saw real estate as a means to grow wealth. And in the meantime, my dad was a developer. Interestingly, he was a developer of retail commercial plazas, but he actually owned a produce company. He was a produce supplier in the city of Toronto for 57 years. So if you actually asked him what he did for a living, he'll never tell you he was a developer. He'll tell you that he was a produce man. But the reality was that produce was a means for him to invest in real estate. And he started off investing, buying single story units down in on St. Clair and Dufferin back in the 70s that had an apartment upstairs. And then from there, it moved on to, a bigger asset, an industrial asset. And then from there, it was land. And he found land and he decided that he was going to develop it and build community plazas, these strip malls that you see all over the city, really. He built a number of them. Mm-hmm. And it came to a point sometime in early 2010 that I had approached my partners, which are my brother-in-laws and my dad. And I said, look, I'd love to build my own plaza as opposed to just managing yours. I'd really like to have my own asset and build it from the ground up. Let's find a piece of land. We looked everywhere in the GTA. We couldn't find anything that made sense anymore because, as everybody knows, GTA land prices had gone up so much that it didn't make sense anymore to buy a single-story plaza. It was just, you were chasing, a 50-year return. It just didn't work.
Right.
So we really just went dormant for a few years. And then in 2015, I had the idea to use the airspace and build mixed use. And we started One Urban. And One Urban's first property was 430 Condos. That was a 4-story, 79-unit project that we developed and built and registered and closed in Barrie. We started that project in 2017. We started construction in 2020, and we closed everything out by 2022. And that was our first run at mixed use and residential properties.
So in case the followers don't know like what mixed use is, like obviously we don't, but like explain what do you mean by mixed use?
Yeah, so mixed use is a building that has exactly that, what the name says, mixed use. So it's got uses of residential, commercial, retail, really anything that falls under that category.
So in your kind of situation, so sometimes our mixed use, which we use, a lot of times you'll own the commercial side and you just rent them out. Were you selling that portion of the building too, or did you rent them out?
So
commercial side.
With the commercial side, we sold a few of the units. We still own about half of the commercial side. And actually, the original intent was for us to sell off the condos, the residential condos upstairs, and keep the entire retail. And that was really the intent for all of our buildings that we had under development at the time, was always to sell the condos and keep the retail portion. Mm-hmm. But sometime after we started construction at 430 Condos, we realized that we didn't want to be condo developers anymore, and we wanted to be purpose-built landlords. So all of our developments at that point literally did a 180 from being designed as condos. We changed up the design, re-engineered it all to make them into purpose-built rentals, still mixed use. So moving forward, any development and any project that we built to keep.
Yeah. And which I thought was amazing because we had this conversation. We're like, oh, so development, are you needing realtors? And we're like, it's like, no, Dave, we've changed. And that's it. So basically you're building them, you're renting them out. You still own the asset.
That's right.
And you get some help from the government as well.
We do. Yeah. The government actually has a lot of great incentives for purpose-built developers that are bringing rental units to market. There are CMHC programs, Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation. Sorry. The CMHC has a lot of programs like RCFI, which is the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, of which I was awarded back in 2021 when we started our Old Bronte project in Oakville, which is actually finishing up now. Little plug-in that 2475 Old Bronte is coming to market in just a couple of months. We got financing on that and through the Canadian government, and they offer favorable terms and low interest rates for developers that are willing to build purpose-built rentals. And the reason why they're doing this is because purpose-built rentals are actually very difficult to pencil out on the pro forma. And the pro forma, for your guests that don't know, is our budget. It is a living, breathing budget that changes almost daily until the last day. Until the day that you finish construction, it will literally go up and down on what is being spent on this project.
Yes. Okay. So for our non-finance people, what a pro forma is basically you're budgeting out. You're trying to forecast what's going to cost, what you're going to earn, and you put it into a spreadsheet. We used to do it on a quarterly basis when I used to be an analyst back then. Some people do it on a weekly and a monthly basis. So reason why Nick is saying it's a living, breathing document is that because you have estimates of what things are going to cost, so how much you're going to bring in. But obviously in the real life, it changes those pro formas and moving forward. So that's why you're constantly changing those. So just a little bit of education for those
And to
people
that
who don't know
point,
performance.
and to just add to what I said a moment ago, that it literally changes right up until the last day of construction.
Of course.
Is because you don't know when you get into the field what you're going to find. Everything looks great on paper, but until you get in the ground, you quite literally don't know what you're unearthing.
Was it the first time we met? We're having the cigar outside, and you're like, "Yeah, like a project can go like $1 million, $2 million, just like this." You just never expect it when you
Right.
put it like when you put a shovel in the ground. It's like,
That's right.
Really, like just gone. Just yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, like you were telling me about one development site you had to do, and like it cost you a couple $1 million to rectify the soil. I think it was.
That's right.
Yeah, go and tell that. Talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So the number isn't quite as high as you said, but
Yeah.
it did cost us a lot of money to
Yeah.
remediate. We bought a gas station that we are actually starting construction in this spring. That is actually the neighboring property to 430 ESSA Condos. It's 440 ESSA purpose built. That property
in
was
Barrie.
in Barrie. Yeah, in Barrie. That property was a gas station that we bought back in 2018. And we've been developing it ever since. We actually are just at the maybe 2-yard line to getting the approval and getting the final building permit so that we can go into the ground. That is also a CMHC funded project under another program called MLI Select. That project had a gas station. So we bought it with a gas station. We bought it knowing that it had some contamination in it. But luckily, it is gas. Gas or hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons evaporate up, not down. So if you're anybody out there looking to buy a piece of property, if there was ever a paint factory or a solvent factory or anything that made any type of environmentally risky anything, bleach, that stuff goes down to the bedrock. So don't buy that property or be prepared for a very, very hefty bill when you clean it up.
So with remediation, for those who don't know, like they basically just take out all the dirt basically and they like clean it, or how does like
so in a nutshell, that's exactly what you're doing is you're identifying through environmental safety assessment how much contamination is in there, where it is. And you go in there with excavators and you're really just excavating while you have an engineer on site that's testing soil to make sure that you are going deep into the land enough or far into the contamination enough to clean it all up. That doesn't always guarantee that it's going to be clean.
Right.
You might have to go back and do a little bit of cleanup at the end or into your excavation and construction, but that's basically how remediation works.
And just if you think that you're as a buyer, this is going to affect you, it actually does affect a lot of residential properties as well.
Absolutely.
So there was one we had when I used to live at Southern Etobicoke, like off of Edgecroft. There was a townhouse complex, right, in which they had people lining up for years, and then it was supposed to be built, but it took 2 years, a year and a half or 2 years, because they didn't realize that they had to remediate the soil. Look good, but it actually, so if you were looking to move in, I had a client, by the time he moved in, he got divorced, and we had to sell his property because his wife and I had bought it when they were, newlyweds. It took that much longer, and that sometimes happens. But yeah, because they weren't anticipating the amount of contamination that was in that soil.
And what it's going to cost either.
Exactly.
So to go back to the performer point, if you anticipate that it's going to cost you $500,000 to clean up, and then you go in there and it costs you $1 million, there's $500,000 on one line item right there.
Which I'm surprised that these guys didn't do, because when we sold a number of our commercial properties, the buyers always, and we did an environmental study, right? We allowed them to dig and low, like even when we said in Dundas, like we've always allowed them to do environmental. It's kind of odd that at one point, like maybe they didn't realize how bad it was. Maybe that was the situation that kind of.
Well, here's the thing with environmental studies is that you're only putting a number of boreholes into that property. You could be 20 feet away from where you could have put a borehole and you didn't think that there was contamination there. And lo and behold, there's contamination there, right? Just 10 feet sometimes, right?
Yeah. That's funny. Well, then we also they do a map, even one of the closest, like I remember when we sold one in Dundas, and there was a little bit of a red flag because there was a gas station, but it was it was 30 years ago and it's been decommissioned 30 years, but it was like.
That stuff sticks.
I know, but it was like 3 blocks away and they're like, well, it's a red flag. I'm like, it's not even close. They're like, well, again, you don't know about leaching.
That's right.
So I learned, again, we learned a lot you learn a lot by being a landlord and jumping into it. Like one piece of your puzzle as well, I wanted to add to that for your listeners. See how Nick started in this business. Again, I always talk to people about education and those kinds of things. Sometimes life gives you such good education that I even tell my kids, you don't have to go to university, even though my parents would disagree at the time, but now they see what we've done. But sometimes the school of hard knocks works. But
that's right.
I got into this business because I bought my first rental property at 25, 26 years old, and I still own it. I got to love real estate. I learned a lot more by handling the books and being involved in how and dealing with people than I've ever learned at sitting in a classroom. So, if you're out there too and you're like, you're struggling to know what you're doing, like real estate is always not a bad option to purchase something or get in a company. Like it's a way to get a foot in the door, and you can learn so much by owning rental properties, I find. So that was just my little plug there to people, like in case you're wondering, how do people start? I think there's a lot more success stories I heard about people buying real estate, sticking with it, learning it that way and going for that with that, as opposed to, losing their shirt or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah. So COVID, we wanted to talk about COVID. So the reason why I bring up COVID, did that obviously change the direction for our HGTV show, because, we went live and then COVID hit and then they weren't sure if they were supposed to have a second season. How did COVID affect your business? Was there a big shift, or did you notice anything different at all?
First off, it was the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. So it really affected everybody. From a business side, this certainly affected us because we started construction in COVID on our first project. So imagine we are first-time mixed-use developers and builders, and we're going into the ground for the first time. And we are quite literally a week away from getting our building permit when Premier Ford announces that he's shutting down all construction, and we were affected by that. So we pumped the brakes in March because we can't pull a building permit if construction isn't allowed to proceed. And then the restrictions get semi-lifted in May. Yeah. So now everybody's scrambling to call all your trades and, okay, we got the green light, we got the permit, let's go. And we start digging in July, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And where it affected us is that things were so unknown at the time, and the direction from Health Canada it changed all the time based on new things that they discovered throughout the process of COVID. That you'd get a trade from one crew, a carpentry crew, for example, of 10 guys. He would get COVID when all 10 guys got to stay home for 14 days.
Holy
and
shit.
If all 10 guys have to stay home for 14 days, that now threw off an entire trade that is, we call it the train in construction. If one of those cars in the train falls off, then everybody behind it that's supposed to come in the succession of the sequence in planning, or sorry, in construction rather, if they fall off, then everybody else is going to be behind. And it happened multiple times. You get brickies. One guy from the bricklayers crew would get COVID. So now all of them got to stay home for 14 days, and then try calling the bricklayer contractor and saying, hey, you need to get me another crew. And they're like, well, where am I going to find you another crew? It was just a mess. And because of that, we were delayed. We actually had
Did you have to pay them for those 2 weeks they stayed at home too, or no?
Well,
probably not.
Indirectly, because then the project gets delayed. And at the very end, at the height of your interest payments, because you've now used your entire loan, any day that you're moving past your scheduled construction day is costing you money. It's really coming out of the bottom line.
Yeah. Wow.
So we were actually very good at containing the delay. We were a total of 6-month delay from when we had originally intended to occupy in November of 21 and finally occupying in May of 2022. It was about a 6-month delay. We did pretty good. I heard a lot of seasoned developers that didn't do quite so well, that they were in often cases over a year of delay. That hurts because you only project your cash flow to a certain date. And if your interest fund depletes at that certain date, then you're putting money into that project every day after that to keep the interest payments going until you close the project.
Well, he also heard of projects that were delayed like longer, like very long. And they went back to the unit holders and said, hey, if you want this project completed, you have to give us an extra X amount of dollars for each unit. Have you heard about some developers going back and asking for more money?
I did. It was in the papers, and there was some developers that were called out. We never did it.
Thank God. Yeah.
I don't really hold anything against the developers that did. They're a business, and they need to figure out how to survive. It's a really crappy situation for developers and for homeowners or purchasers.
Yeah. That
purchasers that put money down 3-4 years ago and thought they were getting a unit for $500,000 are now being told, well, if you want that unit, you got to give me another $50,000 or $100,000.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't have it. And now I don't know what the outcome of that was, if they lost their deal or if there was any pushback. and they were able to get their unit at the price that they paid. I don't know, but look, it happens. There's, some developers will just eat it and say, well, we'll get it on the next one. And then other developers are like, nope.
Yeah.
I gotta get it, every penny on this one.
So what we've noticed developing, what's been working is obviously they don't sell all the units, 100% of the units all the time, right? So for somebody who doesn't know, like with the pre-construction as a developer, what is usually the strategy to sell units?
So the strategy is to launch in the early stages of your marketing, is to launch to friends and families. Those are going to be the absolute best time to buy a unit at the best price, because they are exactly that, friends and family of the developer. They're going to get the best incentives. They're going to get the lowest price. Then after that, it's going to go to the broker community, working with a realtor, working with a broker like yourself that has relationships with developers. You'll be able to get certain number of allocation of units that you'll then go out to your clients and say, look, I've got this block of units, come in. Now is the best time to buy, because from the broker's perspective and the general public, that is the best time to buy, even though friends and families is actually a little bit better, but it's only because you're friends and family of the developer.
Yeah. And I do have some family and friends connections with the help of that too, but our brokerage does a great job. Like when it comes to the broker side, we have tons of that stuff too. Just a little plug for our office. Sorry, go on. Yeah. So go on.
Yeah, but you guys will get a block of units that you can then push to your VIP clients. So we call that platinum. Your platinum brokers, which are the ones that have the best relationships with the developer, are going to get the absolute best prices right in the beginning, and they're only going to get a chunk of those, and you're going to sell those off. And then once that chunk is sold and developers has achieved the threshold of sales revenue that they need to go and trigger their financing, they will go to their bank, get their financing, construction will start. And then there's usually about 25 to 30% of units that haven't been sold through the course of construction, but will sell through construction, and prices will steadily go up for a very good reason, because you're getting your unit very soon. You're buying at a time that it's already under construction. You can see that the building is coming along, so you're paying a little bit more than the people that bought off a piece of paper and they were really just partners of the developer early on in the project. And then at the very end, once a building is completed and occupied, they're typically a block of units that are kept by the developer, maybe 5% or less, that they will sell at the highest price because they are move-in ready. And people can really just buy and move in within, closing of 30 days.
They're called
inventory units.
No, it was something sweets. My wife does it too. Anyway, my wife does a lot. Like, so she works with a lot of developers, like her and her partner for Space Collective. They'll come in, they'll say, hey, we have a suite for you. So the clients come through, and what they'll do is they'll decorate
like
them.
The model suite.
Yeah, model suite. That's it. That's what I was looking for, model suite. And there's one that's similar to that, and they can sell, but they only dress up one of them, and you can actually buy the unit when everything's done at the end of it.
Typically at the end.
Yeah, so it's about 5 or 6 months and stuff too, which is great. And then again, you're right. It is at the height of the market. Where do you see most people, because of this process, right? There's occupancy once you get the keys, as opposed to when you actually close on the property. Sometimes there's delay there. Do you find that because you talk about a lot of pushback from people in the media, from other people saying developers are a piece of shit? I've heard people call you guys names left and right because they think first of all, where do you see most people getting angry with you? And what's your rebuttal to that? Like, where's the biggest pain points that people have with developers?
I had pain points at every stage of the project. I had some purchasers that hadn't seen construction start when they thought it was going to start, and they were sending me nasty emails saying, you guys have stolen our money, and I had to reply, and I replied to them and said, no, we haven't stolen your money. Your money's actually sitting in our lawyer's trust account, and we've sold as a Tarion registered builder, and the project is Tarion registered. So as per Tarion guidelines, we can't take your money. If the project goes bust, guess what? You get your money back because it's as per Tarion, right? And it's in trust. And then I was getting angry purchasers that were saying, well, we thought you were going to be done in November of 2021 and we need to move in. And I can't control the pandemic, right? I can't control losing time in the schedule, because there was oftentimes crews having to stay home because one of them got COVID, right? That just delays the construction. That delays everything. So, you have to explain that. Where I think I got the most pushback was in that interim occupancy fee. The interim occupancy period that you mentioned, where purchasers are paying an interim occupancy fee. They're paying really just the maintenance and the taxes for the building until it registers and closes, and that's always out of our hands. And actually, I emailed purchasers telling them that as a developer, it's completely out of our hands. We can only apply for registration once the building is 97% completed or pretty much substantial performance is what they call it. We then take that to our surveyors, and our surveyors will come in and they will literally survey the whole building, and they will assign pins to every single parking spot and every single unit and every single locker, and everything is measured, and everything is put into official documents, which are called Mylars, and the Mylars are then signed by us and then delivered to the city, and then the city approves it, and then they send it back to our lawyers, and they send it back to their lawyers, and they send it back to the land registry office, and they send it back to the surveyor, and everybody's kind of working together to try to make it get registered. But it takes time, and we're not the only development out there. In the city of Barrie, in that particular instance, there was at least a half a dozen other condos from other developers that were closing all at the same time. On top of that, all of the land registry day-to-day transactions that are happening, that it's not like we're on a priority list, right? They get to it when they get to it. So I had a lot of people coming back to us and saying, hey, when are we going to close? When are we going to finally register? And I actually had purchasers say, you guys just want more money from us. Well, no, I actually want to close so I can stop paying interest. So no, I'd like to close as fast as possible.
Yeah, we're closing our property. I said next week. Sorry, not next week. The next couple of weeks, and we're like, our lawyer came back to us and was like, shit, they're charging like 8 or 9%, and I was like, that was their deal, and I'm like, so. Our little unit, we're getting charged $5,300 a month for this thing. I'm like, holy shit! Like that's so we wanted to close quickly.
On the interest rate. At the time
exactly.
You signed the deal.
Yeah, because it's like there was no way. Like it was an $800,000 purchase. We're looking at the price. I'm like, holy shit, that's a lot of money. And she goes, yeah. So anyway, but there's nothing we can do. You still want the unit. Like, well, yeah, you have to pay. You have to suck it up a little bit, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I know. But so what I talked to you about before when we had a conversation, I think the last time we had lunch, I had a client, and I talked to him like. Had a client. I met her when she was pregnant, 8 months pregnant. And they had just moved into their condo, and they had bought the condo before. They had just gotten married. And during the process, they were looking for a house because they had a little one on the way. It's great. So I went to see them. I said, hey, listen, you haven't registered yet. And actually, according to the document right now, you actually can't sell it because now the builders do this, if there's a certain time frame which you can assign a sell, which is you sell the paperwork to somebody else, but you've moved in and now they've blocked off that time. You can no longer sell it.
Yeah, because they're the developers in the process of registering that unit to your name.
Fast forward, I've been obviously staying in contact with them too. It took them over 2 years for them to register on this property. In that time, she had 2 kids.
Oh my God.
Like things have totally changed. They couldn't get out. They couldn't sell the property. They were paying this internal occupancy. And turns out, I'm like, well, what's going on? I'm like, well, hasn't the property been fully done and fully functional? He goes, it's been fully functional. So I'm like, so which means what Nick was alluding to earlier was there are certain thresholds they have to meet. Like, the gym has to be done, or parking has to be done. Like, all that was done. The only thing we could figure out was that the builder was trying to sell his own units at an exorbitant amount of fee above market value. Like we ended up selling their property for finally we registered. It was like $775 or something. They sold it last year when I was away in Mexico. And the developer at the time was trying to sell 4 or 5 units at $1 million. He was just
he didn't want the competition.
He didn't want the competition. So I could see it. So obviously people were yelling at him, but this was going on for almost a year by the time they were able to register.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So you hear about stories like that, and you can see why there's people pushing back at developers and saying, you're stealing your money. Now, I don't see that very often, right? But how often do they usually get delays? Like Tridel talks about their delays, maximum is between occupancy and registrations, 6 months. What's the longest you've ever heard of besides this 2-year guy?
I've heard of some long ones too. We were actually 6 months on our project.
But 6 months is fantastic.
We'd actually registered and closed. We had registered in October. So I had mentioned to you that we had moved in residents in May of 2022. We registered in October, and we had final closing actually just before the holidays in 2022. So, we were only 6 months. I've developed, Tridel is very, very quick. They're a beast, though. Those guys, you hear the slogan, relax, it's Tridel, right?
Yeah,
It's true.
it's true.
They've got it down to a science, those guys.
Gold standard, apparently, from like as developers, they should all like, try to follow.
Try to follow them.
Yeah, there are some pushbacks lately. Some of their pre-construction stuff, they've gone a little too far, where people have actually turned away some people. Like I've heard, anyway. I was with a developer yesterday. We were talking about this, and it's like, because now they're like their approvals and things like that. Like some people, like they've affected their approvals. Anyway, long story short, it's like it's a little blip. Hopefully they'll figure it out. But most of the time they're the gold standard when it comes to like the new developers should look what they're doing. And
yeah. I mean, we could talk about Tridel in an entire segment on its own. They've got a long history in the city.
Yeah.
But I've heard, just to go back to your question, I've heard of registration taking over a year in some instances. It depends on how big the project is too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we were quick, but we only had a 4-story project, right? Some of these towers in the city, they oftentimes actually have multiple registrations and multiple condo corps in there, and they register and close out chunks of floors at a time.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So before we wrap up we talked about like when we were first about your Christianity, how you got to that. Were you always as Christian as you are now? How did you, like, if you mind me asking, maybe like, because people know that I'm, how Christian, I've talked about my, going from Catholicism back in 2009 to Christianity, how the shift was there a definite time in your life where you said, yeah, I knew exactly what happened with you? And does that also affect your business, how you and your brother-in-law run your business?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in a Christian home. I wasn't always a Christian. I wouldn't always profess to be a Christian either in some of my actions. But at sometime in my early 20s, I think the light bulb went off and realized that Jesus Christ really is the way and the truth and life and I followed Jesus Christ ever since, and it's something that I instill in my children. I've got 4 small children at home, and
God bless.
Thank you.
That's a lot of kids.
We pray with them every day, and we read with them every day, and my number one priority as a father is to make sure that my kids get into heaven, not Harvard. Harvard would be really nice, but it's not the priority. Heaven is the priority. How does it affect my business? The Bible says to be innocent as a dove and shrewd as a snake, right? So we don't do anything that goes against our beliefs and goes against our morals, and we try to run a really good business, and we try to be good to our purchasers and to our renters and to our trades and to the city, and we believe that works for us. Because we're always upfront, we're really transparent, and I think you can really see it in our product. You can see it in who we are, and people think that we're actually weak because we're Christian. I think that we're stronger. I'm stronger on my knees with my hands up in the air than you are standing in front of me with your fists out, right?
Amen to that. Yeah.
Oh, big time.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah, big time. I say it every day. I mean, the doors that are opened before me is because God goes before me and opens those doors. I don't open any of the doors. I actually just got some fantastic news on the drive here. I'm not going to share it, but and I said to the guy, yeah, I can't. It's too early. I can't.
No.
This is a public podcast, but
you're lucky we're not live.
I said to the guy on the other end, he's not a Christian. I said, "Thank you, Jesus, hallelujah," and he's like, "Yeah." Because it was really good news, but I have to praise God for these achievements and for these doors that are opening, because it's not me. I'm not opening doors. I'm not making financing work. I'm not making the city give me a permit. There's nothing I can do in the physical to get more ahead than what Jesus Christ and God does before me. Mm-hmm. He goes before me, and I truly believe that I am blessed and favored.
100%. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I still sometimes struggle with doing that, right? Because it's like I explain to people like how God has affected us. Like since 2008, even Natalie and I were struggling with cash, and sometimes we didn't have money. We had a fire at my rental property. We had no money coming in, and then they're like, but we had to pay mortgages on that, and then we were getting married, and then we were renovating our own property, and it was like, I remember a couple of times we're like, I don't know how we're going to make mortgage payments this month, and Natalie gets a thing in the mail going, oh, by the way, you can sell your shares for guests. So she sold her shares for the exact amount of money we needed to make the payment. I'm like, that's interesting. Another time we're sitting there like, oh my God, I'm like, Nat, again, we don't have any money. We're almost a year. Like nobody knew how much we were struggling. All of our credit cards were maxed out. We were just kind of living our life. We were just normal. We're thankful for being alive. We're thankful for God, everything he gave us. But sometimes sometimes we were struggling, and then we were getting hammered from we had a guy who tried to screw us over, and then we had to go to court, and then he ended up siphoning like 13,000 of cash, which I didn't have, to pay out to him. And another time I was like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. All of a sudden I got an email like, oh, by the way, you have a mortgage vacation this month. And I'm like, God bless, when I was trying to figure out like what we're supposed to do with their house, all of a sudden I said, God, give me a sign. What's going on? All of a sudden we found we're putting an offer on a house. Natalie was pregnant. We needed the house. We couldn't actually live in the house because it was too small. And it was funny. I explained this to people. You know what the most reaction is like? Well, it's just coincidence.
No, it's not.
And I'm like,
no, it's
I just told you 3 examples how when in the Bible it talks about when God will provide.
Yeah.
Don't think about the future. Like the birds in the air, they don't think about what they're going to eat that day. Same thing with God. You just go like you listen what God says, and they're like, well, that's just coincidence. And I'm like, I'm explaining to you how this is not. It can't be coincidence.
The Bible doesn't promise happiness; it promises peace. Jesus promised peace, right? And oftentimes in my business affects my personal life big time because it's what I do. It's part of my life. I don't go to work to be a developer. I wake up, I am a developer. When I wake up, I eat, breathe, sleep, everything, real estate, and the next move. And so when something happens, and oftentimes in development, things go bad. And when they go bad on a big scale. I'll get a news and my wife will say, are you okay? And I say, yeah. She say, no, are you for real? I'm like, yeah, I'm at peace with it. And I think that's the thing that I try to tell people the most is that things happen every day. Being a Christian doesn't mean that you're going to be on a high horse all the time. It means that you're going to have peace with everything that happens and that God will just never abandon you. Like you were saying, God will always provide, right? Even the birds don't know what they're going to eat, but God will provide for them, right? And I always have peace regardless of what happens. And just to go back to what I said, I believe that I'm blessed and favored. When I get a bad news and when I think it's going to be something really, really big, God finds a way on his time. Might take a few weeks, might take a few months.
But don't you notice
God finds a way.
But he teaches you something every single time.
It teaches you to trust him.
Yeah. But I'm saying even the hard time, you learn about something new that he's teaching you, which you can use further on. Like, oh, remember, so now you can like really bad time. I'm using it in general. Like, oh, now you're like, I thought that was the end of the world. And I'm like, okay, there's a reason why I'm going through this, trials and tribulations. You learn from it. Next time something pops up, I'm like, oh, I've already done that. You know what I mean? That's my point. It happens.
In the moment, you don't always see God in the moment.
Right.
You always see God in the past when you're 5 years after a certain incident and you're looking back and it was a really important pivotal moment in your life. You're looking back and you're like, I could totally see God in that now because of the time that has passed since it. And you can see how God has really let all the pieces of the puzzle come together for you because God sees our bigger picture. We don't.
Of course. Yeah, that's great. So now we have to wrap up, unfortunately. So parting words. So I have a question here, and just like any advice you give to someone looking who maybe wants to start into developments, whether they want to invest in developments or become a developer like yourself, or just some sort of entrepreneurship, whether one piece of advice you would tell them just right off the bat?
Yeah, stay true to yourself. Just try to treat everybody with respect. Try to love people when you're working together. People are more willing to help you when you're humble than when you come out with a lot of arrogance and try to be somebody that you're not. There's a lot of guys out there. There are a ton of guys out there that call themselves developers by name, and I always say, what have you built? Like, let's be real, right? Like, go into it with humility, and people are always willing to help you out. And from the real estate side of things, buy a piece of property. If you haven't owned a piece of property before, if you haven't owned a rental, if you're living at home and you're 25 and you're thinking, I'm going to move out and go pay rent, don't. Stay at home.
Yes.
Buy the property. Stay at home for another 5 years if you have to. There's nothing wrong with being 30. There's nothing wrong with being 40 and still living with mom and dad. If they're not charging you rent, stay there. Buy the property. And then when you move out, don't move out into that property. Move out and buy another property.
Well, use the equity if you can to buy another property. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Start there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody needs to buy an acre of empty land to develop a building on right away. They can start like I did, buying that single family home or buying the townhouse or buying the condo and just starting there and using the equity to buy the next one and using the equity of both to buy the next one after that. And it really is like a snowball rolling down a hill, right? It'll just get bigger and bigger and bigger over time.
Well, that's a piece of advice I gave to, we had a realtor party at my house, and I had some young realtors like, any piece of advice you'd give us. I'm like, do you own your property? They're like, a property? They said, no. I'm like, how do you advise on somebody if you haven't really bought yourself a property?
You'd be surprised how many realtors don't own
property. I know there's a ton. That's what I'm saying. But I'm like, but how do you want to put yourself in that shoes? Buy something, feel what it's like, go through the then you'll know. You have to live it a little bit.
That's right.
I love that. All right, Nick. So if somebody wants to see you, what's the best way to reach out to you or to follow you?
Yeah, they can follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn at oneurban.ca. They can find us on the web at oneurban.ca. And yeah, thanks for having us.
And one more, and your podcast.
Thank you. Oh, the podcast is Groundbreakers.
Okay, great. So follow along. Nick, again, always a pleasure having you. Well, it's the first time you've been in the office, but a pleasure seeing you as usual. Guys, again, if you like the content, we always ask you to like and subscribe, punch that button below, share with your friends, and you can watch us anywhere, like on podcasts or listen anywhere. You're probably going to share with your friends too, I hope, as well. Nick.
I will.
Awesome.
This is great.
All right, guys. So next time, thanks again for watching. Bye for now.